Hey geeks, I'm Trey Guillotine, and today I'm talking about Game of Thrones Season 7. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it around so others can join in the conversation. Let's geek out. This video will contain spoilers for Game of Thrones Season 7 and the books A Song of Ice and Fire. You've been warned. I was waiting until the end of Season 7 to watch this season of Game of Thrones, because the last few seasons left me very disappointed. And no, I'm not disappointed because I think the books are better. I didn't even start reading the books until a few months before the show came out. When the series started, it was this very real story about bad people doing bad things and getting away with it. Because the world sucks. So in that way, it was barely fantasy. It was dramatic and full of deception and intrigue and had all of these moving pieces. And it also had a lot of sex and violence. I actually thought the fight choreography in the show was some of the best I'd ever seen. And I still think that. For a few seasons, I was so happy with the story that it was telling, how the story was presented, and the pace at which it was telling it. Where the show started to lose me wasn't where the show passed the books, but when the show started racing to get to the end. Which was odd because they specifically split the stories of the second book into 2 different seasons. Which was a great idea that allowed them time for the books to finish. Not that they ever will be. So it was odd when the show started increasing the pace of the story. Faster and faster until it did actually pass the books. And for the seasons after that, it really felt like they were just making things up as they went. That they had no plan for what they were doing, or how to compensate for passing the books, which again is very odd. Because the show creators know the entire plot of the books. They know where this ends. George Martin told them. And it's a well-known fact that George Martin takes his damn time finishing his books. So going into the project, they knew this point was very likely a possibility. I had considered that maybe it was pressure from HBO, that they wanted to finish the show and end it. Whether that is true or not, I don't know. But it doesn't make sense to me, as it's one of HBO's most successful shows, and one of the most popular shows in the world. They're even working on a spin-off, because of course they're working on a spin-off. They don't want to let that cash cow go anytime soon. So it doesn't make sense for me for them to rush to the end. And the writing that we saw in this haste was very weak. The show became nothing more than naked women and deaths for shock value. That's all it was at some point. Though you could argue that that's what Game of Thrones has always been. But I would disagree with you. At least about the deaths. The sex, that's definitely always been there. But when you spend an entire scene slowly showing a naked woman just to get a guy hard so he can get infected with poison, that was dumb. But the deaths, at least in the beginning, while a lot of deaths were shocking, they had purpose. But then their purpose became shock. And we'd see reviews and articles, and that was all they were talking about. Who was going to shockingly die next? Like it was some fantasy Final Destination. Or Final Fantasy Destination. I hated it. The series that I enjoyed so much just lost me. Well, after watching Season 7, I may have been a little hard on Game of Thrones. I still think they needlessly rushed to get to the end. But now that we're here, I actually really like what I'm seeing. Season 7 was probably the best season so far, with the exception of the one episode of Hard Home. But I thought this season was the best for a few reasons. It was short. Usually seasons are about 10 to 13 episodes long. This season was 7 episodes. It was short and sweet. Figuratively speaking, there wasn't much actual sweetness in this season. Well, some, but not much. It didn't waste time on filler. Everything that happened for an important reason. And when it did happen, it didn't waste its time. Like when Davos goes to Gendry. Davos has this long speech planned out to get Gendry to join Jon Snow. He gets ready to try and convince him, and Gendry's just like, yeah, whatever, I'm in, let's go. And off they go. It was such a simple scene, and said so much about both characters, and was also just entertaining to watch. The other reason is not just the characters, but the characters we've seen go through so much finally meet, with the weight of their journeys on their shoulders. I don't think there was a single meeting where characters who'd previously met didn't have to talk and resolve their differences, and find a way to work together. That conflict resolution was practically the entire season. and I loved seeing it. And characters who've never seen the other meet, like Jon and Daenerys, now are in the same room and the same bed. These characters have gone through so much, and you can see it in who they are now. And I love it. The action this season, with the exception of Hardhome, was also some of the best I've seen in this show. And a lot of that benefited from the characters that were fighting together. When Jon Snow and Gendry and the Hound and Tormund Giantsbane and Dany and her dragons are all fighting together, the army of the dead, oh, I got chills. The action itself was awesome to see, and I always like a good action. In a movie or show or book or video game, anything with solid fights and strong characters who are fighting for something. I'm an English major and I love deeper drama, but damn it if I don't love some action. But as much as I enjoyed this season, and I do think this is the best season so far, it's because of this awesome action that I feel the show isn't really what it used to be. In the beginning, the bad guys won, because they played dirty. Now, the good guys are winning, most of the time. In part because some of the bad guys are now good guys and are playing dirty. But also the show has gotten to the point that it can't afford to lose any more characters. Literally, they probably can't afford to lose another actor, and have to negotiate a new deal with a new actor to play a new character. And that's where the benefit of telling the story in books comes in. The reason the books work with killing off so many characters is that there is always a new character to take their place. And the show can't feasibly do that. And because of that, the show has boiled down to the good guys and the bad guys. And at this point, the chances are good that the good guys are gonna win. Which is not what this show was ever about. This show never had hope. This story doesn't have any high points after the Feast at Winterfell in the very beginning. I worry that this show has transitioned from one about deception and betrayal, and is now just about the good guys winning. I worry that Game of Thrones has just become like every other fantasy out there. Literally like another fantasy out there. The last scene in this season, with the Night King and the Army of the Dead and the Dragon, is almost the same exact shot from the opening cinematic of World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. But I don't necessarily think that Game of Thrones becoming like other fantasy stories is necessarily a bad thing. I like those other fantasies. I like the magic and the sword fights, and the knights and monsters. And for what Game of Thrones has become, it's doing all of that really well. And ultimately, I think Game of Thrones was always going to end up just another fantasy. Even the books, while replacing characters you kill off is a great practice to keep things new and fresh, it does have a limit. Especially in a story that is essentially boiling down to the end of the world. The end was always going to boil down to two sides with one line drawn in the sand. I loved this season of Game of Thrones. I still think that they needlessly rushed to get to the end, but now that we're here, I'm thoroughly engaged in the story and what's going to happen next. When planning your next Wizard World Comic-Con experience, use the discount code GuillotineGeek online to get 10% off your ticket purchase, and use those savings to buy some merch or meet a celebrity. What did you think of Season 7 of Game of Thrones? Let me know in the comments and follow me on all the internets. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it so others can join in the conversation. Check out my written content at guillotinegeek.blogspot.com, support my future content by becoming a patron on my Patreon, and subscribe to my channel to geek out some more. Thanks for watching and have fun. So Captain America, Thor, Hulk.